Hello and welcome to the Apex. Our guest this week is Richard Noble, a man who, in his own words, comes from an extraordinary age when Britain and her brilliant and risk-taking engineers led the world in aerospace developments. Committed to the cause of engineering excellence, he brought the land speed record back to Britain in 1983 behind the wheel of Thrust 2 at 633 miles per hour, and 14 years later led the Thrust SSC team, which saw Andy Green achieve the first supersonic land speed record at 763 miles per hour. In his recently published book, aptly titled Take Risk, he tells the story of the Thrust records alongside the trials and tribulations of bringing other innovative projects into reality on land, at sea and in the air. We're delighted to have him with us today. Richard, welcome to the Apex.
Thank you so much, Hector. I'm looking forward to this.
I thought we'd start at the beginning. In your book, you describe watching John Cobb's Crusader on Loch Ness, vying for the water speed record in 1952, and growing up with the intention of breaking the world land speed record. How did the young Richard Noble end up dreaming about being the fastest man on Earth, and were you always destined to be an engineer?
Well, yes, the one or two things are wrong there, actually, Hector. First of all, let's start at the beginning. John Cobb had just set up his base at Drumnadrochit on Temple Pier there on the north side of Loch Ness. And Dad was taking the family for a drive, my dad, and he stopped because there were a whole lot of people there standing by the side of the road, looking down on Temple Pier. And so we stopped to have a look, and there it was John Cobb's jetboat Crusader. It was the most fabulous thing I've ever seen. I mean, it was all silver with red stripes on it, and it wouldn't even look out of place today. It was astonishing. I never saw it run, sadly, but I saw it there, and I just thought, wow, if this guy can do this, maybe there's a future there.
So I think a question most car enthusiasts and speed freaks would love to ask is what it feels like to travel at over 600 miles per hour. So could you tell us about that and what memories stick out for you from the Thrust 2 and the Thrust SSC projects?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, certainly I never drove Thrust SSC because that's Andy Green's position. That's his thing. But I've been over 600 miles an hour 11 times on Thrust 2. Thrust 2 was a very, very clever car. It was created by John Ackroyd. It was his design. And I think it's probably one of the best performing land speed records cars of all time. The fundamental thing with these land speed record cars is they generally underperform. And when John and I started this, we set our design target at 650 miles an hour. And it made a peak speed of 650.88. So it was highly successful. And at high speed, I could drive it to an accuracy of about 1.5 inches laterally. It was absolutely amazing piece of engineering. And I'm not an engineer. John was the engineer, and John was the guy who did it. So driving it, yeah, well, okay. Imagine that you're sitting in the cockpit of Thrust 2. And it's, of course, a British car, so we drive it on the right-hand side. It upsets the Americans. And we've got, you're sitting there with your left shoulder approximately 3 inches from a red-hot Rolls-Royce Avon turbine. So you're pretty sort of squashed in there. But we did get the design of the cockpit right, and it did work very well. One of the crucial features of the design of the cockpit was the armrests. You wouldn't believe this, but absolutely. Because basically when you're driving with a very low steering ratio, and you've got to put in quite good movements, and you've got to get it absolutely right. And you have to position and, if you like, lock your elbows so you can make very small movements. And in the old days, when we first drove Thrust 2, we didn't realize this. Later on, we got the armrests in, and that made a hell of a difference. Okay, the car is powered by this large jet engine, which is a Rolls-Royce Avon 302 from a Lightning F6 fighter. We've upgraded it a bit, so it's got about 17,000 pounds of thrust, so over 30,000 horsepower. And it's connected up to a little gas turbine, remote gas turbine called a Palouse, and the Palouse spins up. The starter team actually press the button on it, and it spins up to speed, and then it pumps compressed air down a large canvas pipe into Thrust 2, and that spins the big engine up. So you give them the signal, and basically they start. They wind up the Palouse, and the next thing is you press the button. The Palouse goes into overdrive, and suddenly you've got the engine winding up. And you watch it very, very carefully. And when it gets to a certain figure, I can't remember exactly what it was now, you basically open the HP cock. And at that point, then the fuel starts to flow in, and you get an enormous rumble as this huge, giant engine comes to life.
That must be an unbelievable noise.
Yeah, it's not very loud at that point. It's just running at idle. And we run it up to about 40-odd% when the oil light goes out. And we sit there. And now you've got to concentrate on the actual driving. So the thing about the course is, and we're looking here at the Black Rock Desert, is that it consists of a lot of parallel lines, giving you a course width or a track width of 50 feet, okay? So you're going to drive down this track, which is 50 foot long, and you're sitting on the right-hand side of the car, and you're going to drive by the right marker on the side of the track. And we marked it with using a Jaguar fire tender, which was ideal, seemed to go nice and straight. So you sit there with the engine running and you do all your engine checks and make sure everything's okay. In the meantime, basically you're working the radio. And the fundamental problem is that you can only see about 2.5 miles to the horizon, because of course you've got the curvature of Earth and we're going to run down a track which is 13 miles long. So you can't see what's happening at the other end. So the secret to that is to have an airplane. So we have an airplane buzzing up and down. And we call up the airplane and just make sure we haven't got any stray Americans on the track. And all is well, okay? And then the moment comes to go. So you hold the car on its brakes with the left foot. All these cars are left foot braked, okay? So you hold it with your left foot. You then ease the throttle forward. And what you're doing there is that you're speeding the engine up until it gets to 92% of maximum RPM. So you've got all the fighter aircraft instrumentation in the cockpit. 92% is very critical, because if you go much faster than that, the car will go along and lock wheels, and that's no good. So you're holding it down on its brakes, and you've got 92%. You're doing your last checks. Okay, we're ready to go. So it brakes off, so your foot comes straight off that pedal, and you slam accelerate with your right foot, pushing it down to the floor. That brings in the afterburner, and if you've done it well, you'll get the afterburner flame in within 30 feet of movement. Now you're off, and you've got 30,000 horsepower. You're running on aluminium wheels, which don't grip the desert very well. And the one thing you must never, ever do is to let up. You must never come back on the throttle. Otherwise, it shows at the top speed. So you've got to keep your foot flat on the floor. So you're holding the car, trying to hold the car within the 50-foot wide track. It's sliding all over the place. It's a bit like a kind of rally car, really. And you're belting it. And you're watching the airspeed indicators, and you realize, and you get to a point where you've got about 300 miles an hour. And at 300 miles an hour, then we've got two tail fins on the car, and it starts to go steady there. It starts to go straight from about 300 miles an hour. Now, the important thing is you've got to keep your foot absolutely flat on the ground, on the floor. So you've got that maximum power, and you really start to pick up speed, big time. But the curious thing about it is it's really rather boring, because there's nothing to see. There are no trees there. You do see the mountains start to change perspective very quickly, but otherwise there's not much to see. So you keep your foot flat down there. So 300 to 500 is a bit boring. But once you get over 500, it gets really interesting, because the airflow starts to go supersonic, first of all, over the intake arch, which you can see from the cockpit. And you can start to see the little shock wave build up there. And then when you get up to 615 miles an hour, it goes supersonic over the wheel arch. And you can see the shock wave build up. And about that speed, there was one day when it was very cold, and we got the whole car enveloped in simply a white cloud caused by the loss in pressure behind the shock wave.
So you were driving effectively blind?
No, I could see through it.
Oh,
I could see through it. It's okay. So, you're coming up now to the start of the measured mile. This is where the fun starts. And this is where the timekeepers have actually driven backwards and forwards at right angles across the course in order to sort and control and set up the timing lights. And as you approach that, it's absolutely fascinating because your mental processes have sped right up and the whole thing is happening in slow motion. So you're very, very relaxed and you can see every single detail on that track go under your car at 600 and something miles an hour. You're into the measured mile then, and you've got to keep going. You've got to keep accelerating right the way through the measured mile. You're trying to get the maximum that you possibly can through the measured mile.
Flat out.
And then you are, and then you come out the other end. When you come out the other end, you've got to be very, very disciplined because you're into the deceleration, and this is dodgy. So you come back slowly on the throttle, which cancels the afterburner. You then count 1, 2, 3. That cools the engine, and then you pull back on your throttle pedal, which has got a catch on top of it, and that shuts the engine off. Now, then you've got a dodgy situation because basically what's happening now is that the airflow is no longer going through the engine at the volume it was before, and it's starting to build up at the front, and there's a danger the car will go sideways. So at that point, you've got to get the parachute out, and you literally just touch the button with your finger. Explosive charge goes off at the back, and the parachute's there immediately, and you're getting between 5 and 6G deceleration. It's very, very violent stuff. So 5G is over 100 miles an hour per second deceleration. And you get an extraordinary effect called the somatographic illusion.
Wow.
What's actually happening is that when you're sort of walking around normally, your inner ears give you the balance. Your balance, okay? So your inner ears are very crucial in all this. When the car is decelerating as violently as that, then the inner ears can't work. And you get the firm impression that you're driving vertically downwards through to the center of the earth. It's an extraordinary experience. And with some of the very high-performance jets, they've had that sort of trouble with the pilots when they're trying to accelerate, because, again, the opposite happens. The pitch goes up when you're accelerating, and the pitch goes down when you're accelerating, and and there's a lot of danger you pull back on the stick and break the aeroplane. So in this case, basically, you're convinced you're driving safe down into the middle of the earth, and then after a few seconds, it's kind of all over. You're down to a leisurely 400 miles an hour. At that point, it's incredibly boring. I mean, it really is. You want to open the hatch and get out, it's all over,
Still
but
done.
you're still at 400. And you've got to watch it down very, very steadily down to 200. And at 200, you start bringing the wheel brakes in. And then you try to wheel brake the car as quickly as you can without locking the wheels, because, of course, you've got to turn around in due course and make the return run. So then you bring it to a halt. You get everything shut down, you immediately get your notepad out and you write everything you can possibly remember. So you've got all your checklists, everything else there. You check everything, write everything, and then before long, the Jaguar's alongside, and basically I'm being released. So that's what a land speed record run's like.
I feel like I was right there in the cockpit. That's what an extraordinary,
well, then.
what an extraordinary description. I still have to catch my breath now. So I suppose the next question is, you've had a brilliant perspective on land speed records with Thrust 2, Thrust SSC, and of course, more recently, the Bloodhound project. Do the sometimes difficult experiences of the Bloodhound project, for example, suggest that the challenges faced by the teams involved in these records are changing as the bar is being set higher and higher over the years?
No, not at all. I mean, certainly, yes, of course it is. I mean, it's more demanding in terms of the engineering and the physics and everything else. What is so difficult is Britain. Britain, unfortunately, is going backwards. And in this country, people are totally and utterly risk averse. And we can tell you some stories about all that, but it just makes the whole thing incredibly difficult. These projects are unbelievably valuable. I mean, they really are, because what they do is they generate enormous global exposure for the country, and that's what we're doing it for the country. And so to give you an idea, Bloodhound did 1.5 billion media exposures. Thrust SSC, when we broke the sound barrier, we had the largest website in the world. What would a company pay to be a part of something like that? I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And unfortunately, Bloodhound got marooned and wrecked by the UK government, which was very, very sad. Very, very difficult because I'd spent 31 million on it already. We got to a point where we got the car built and we were ready to go and everything else. And the big problem was obviously the money to get us out, to get the car finished out to South Africa. And we landed this fantastic deal with a Geely car company in Hangzhou in China. And I love these people. They were just absolutely great. And Chairman Lee was just terrific. I mean, come on, he said, let's do it. And we did it. We got it all together. And the deal, he put in his money, or the first tranche of his money, which is a considerable sum. And then the government had already signed up to review Bloodhound, and that was set up by the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And basically, we went through a program which took, I suppose, the better part of 6 months while they reviewed the whole thing. And then I got a letter from the Minister of Transport saying, fine, we're going to give you 4.5 billion, which was brilliant. We actually achieved this. It was an astonishing team achievement. And we went for the meeting with the civil servants, and they said, have you signed with the Chinese? And we said, yes. Here's the contract. Here's all the documentation. You can see the bank account. You can see it's in the bank. We met all their conditions, and the meeting went sour. And they wouldn't talk to us. There were no more meetings. It was absolutely unbelievable. And I think personally we'd been set up, and they didn't think we could do it. And we had done it. We'd achieved everything, and they just were not going to pay. And so this is a hell of a thing. So I went back to China and saw the Chinese and said, guys, I'm terribly sorry. The British government has defaulted, and they're not going to pay. And of course, the Chinese were very kind and very understanding about this. And I had a really nice letter from the chairman saying, look, we understand this is not your fault. But basically, their view was, they never actually said so, but it was pretty obvious, was that if the British government wasn't going to play its part, then why should they fund it? And so there was no more money from them. And of course, then we were into a battle to survive. And 18 months later, we'd beaten the government and turned them around. And the Secretary of State apologized for all this and renewed the deal. But by that time, we were into Brexit. There was no money for anything. The Chinese were long gone, and there was no way we could survive. So I had to put it into administration. That was that.
And that was terribly sad. It's interesting because in your book, you talk about these events and also more broadly about another theme, which is, and I think it comes out in what you're saying, this quite odd attitude that British society seems to have when it comes to engineering and science. On the one hand, priding ourselves on an incredible history of innovation and engineering and risk-taking. And then on the other, public institutions. And I think you make this comment as well, that our education system seem to be seem to be designed to encourage risk avoidance and rote learning and what I think.
It's terrible. I mean, it really is terrible, and it's just such a shame that we can't get involved in that because we're talking about the next generation, and if we don't.
What do you think needs to change in order to turn this around?
Well, what we've got to do is we've got to be a lot brighter and a lot cleverer and a hell of a lot smarter. And all I can do is just talk from our own experience. But we were asked by the Ministry of Defence to set up the Bloodhound education team in order to take the project through every single school in the country. I thought this was absolutely terrific. Andy Green wasn't quite so sure, but it turned out to be an absolute masterstroke. And the minister asked us to do this. So I committed and said, yes, we'll do it. And we got going. And before long, we were engaging with 120,000 kids a year. We had 3 full-scale models of Bloodhound, and these went around the schools. Some of them were doing 70,000 miles a year. Wow. It was absolutely extraordinary. And what we learned from this was that we were inspiring the kids. It was Minister Paul Drayson's idea, and he said, during the Concord years, all those years back, He said the Concorde project inspired a huge number of scientists and engineers, and he wanted us to do the same. So that's what we set up, and we did. And then I think the sort of apex of all this thing was that we ran the car at Newquay in 2017, and we had 3 sort of public days there. 10,000 people paid to come and see the car run. And on the last day, we had 3,000 school kids there. And seeing these school kids, they're just so excited, absolutely bumping up and down, really buzzy. I had a bit of a problem with the engineers who are a lot of them are ex-Formula One, and One on Earth we're dealing with education. Formula One doesn't. And I said, look, guys, this is what it's all about. We're here to talk to the kids. Let's get that going. And I came back about half an hour later, and it was going tremendously. It really was. And everybody was laughing and joking. And the kids were talking to all the engineers, and they knew who they all were. And then we took the car out to run, and we did 200-mile-an-hour runs, 200-mile-an-hour runs using the afterburner. Bloody great noise. Kids absolutely jumping around. And then I realized, it dawned on me what was actually happening. Because, you see, these kids are the product of a screen age. The only excitement they get is on the bloody screen. And the problem with the screen is it's all faked. We know it's all faked. Everything's bloody faked. But, of course, seeing a land speed record car drive down the runway there at Newquay, that's not fake. That's absolutely for real.
You absolutely feel it.
Yeah. Oh, my God, yes. It shakes the whole earth. Yeah, it's terrific stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think another thing that you talk about in the book quite a lot is how much successful projects, whether it's an aircraft company or a land speed record attempt, need not just good engineering, but a committed team and committed sponsors. And on that element of people, what in your experience is the magic ingredient that separates success from failure?
There is one magic ingredient which is essential to this, which is the way in which the team works. Now, what actually happens is, from our perspective, is that we're seen by sponsors as being sort of a fairly sort of dodgy organization that might come good, that are risking their money, but we do generate an awful lot of publicity for them, and that's what they really want. But as soon as life gets difficult, like for instance, if we decide we're going abroad to go and run the car, we need the funds and everything else, they'll run away. They'll cancel. They'll drop out. If it looks like getting at all dodgy, they go. Simple as that. And we only got to America with Thrust SSC because of one guy, Jeremy Davey. And Jeremy and the team, Jeremy ran the website, and we needed about 1 million liters of jet fuel for the airplane we'd borrowed. And nobody's going to help us, the usual problem. And so Jeremy said, well, why don't we go to our worldwide followers? Where we are, we've got this website. We were the first in Britain to do end-to-end electronic trading. Let's go and put up some money. So Jeremy and I wrote the thing that night. And we said to everybody, we've got a real problem. We've approached all these oil companies. Nobody's going to help. And we need this fuel, and it's $25 a head. And in return for your $25, you'll get a special fuel certificate signed by Andy. We didn't tell Andy. We told him about that later.
Oh, God.
And, we put that thing out, and the next morning there was 30,000 gallons.
Excellent.
It was fantastic. And that's how we beat Britain, and that's how we got away. But that then gave us a huge problem, because basically we're out on the desert then, running for the sound barrier. And we knew that we would never get back again because Britain would not support it. We got out on a fluke, and it's probably unlikely that we could ever do that again. So we had to stick it right the way through until the winter, keeping going. And at the last minute, we finally broke the sound barrier. And we got our supersonic record, which has never, ever been beaten.
But it strikes me as well that you must have had an incredibly motivated team of engineers. I think there are descriptions that you've given of people having to be told not to work on Sundays, burning everyone out. It's quite
I was, years and years ago, I used to teach management. And frankly, it was an American company. They were the top of the game. I reckoned it was rubbish, frankly. And there were better ways of working, because I'd run expeditions across Africa and Asia, and you quickly learn when you're living with people how to work with people. And during when I was working with the Americans, I found the book by Abraham Maslow, Maslow. Maslow was an absolute genius. He really understood this. And he created a thing called the hierarchy of needs, which is basically a pyramid showing how the different levels of motivation. And in the book, he went on to say that basically, if you get these things wrong, then in a large company, and in most of these large companies, the motivation levels are very low, that only about 15% of the staff will ever get to a high level of motivation, because because they're running a hierarchical organization, and you don't really do anything for yourself. You just do what you're told. And he went on to say that 15% of the employees in any particular company will probably go to their retirement and deaths never knowing what they really could do if they were given the chance. So you've got to create an organization that works another way around. And so we create flat organizations, and people are given the authority and the responsibility for what they do. They can actually go and fail the company if they wanted to. But it doesn't happen like that, because, of course, they're very, very serious about what they're doing, and they realize that it's most unusual to start working in a situation like this. And it works very well. They get very, very excited, and the productivity is unbelievable. So to give you an idea, with the Thrust SSC project, our total cash expenditure was about 4 million, I think. And we were up against the McLaren Formula One team, and their budget was 25 million. They were hopeless. They couldn't do it.
Oh, dear.
So the teamwork side of it is absolutely crucial. And if you get this right, then what happens is that your staff turnover is absolutely minimal. Because people really enjoy working like this, because they find out who they are.
That sounds like an incredibly healthy way to do it. And I think it leads on to my next question, which is, and looking at what we've said so far, in our modern interconnected world and with the benefit of modern technology, do you think it's easier or harder for these small motivated teams to bring imaginative, adventurous projects of the kind you've been involved in to fruition?
I think our problem is the establishment. We've got to see, Britain is an organization that's grown from the colonies and from its empire and everything else. And everything is about hierarchical organizations. And some of the important people in the world, in other words, the accountants and the lawyers and the venture capitalists, don't understand anything else. And they like hierarchical organizations because they know that somebody's in charge of this. They can point fingers and all that sort of thing. They do not understand a flat company. And it's all about control. And from our point of view, it's all about lack of control. They're actually passing the control to your team and letting them get on with it and really helping them get through it all. And that's our problem. We can't do it. There are quite a few companies now practicing this, and one of the most famous is Haier in China, the washing machine company, and that's worth studying. But we're very backward in this country, and we do need some proper leadership.
I think that's plenty of food for thought for people listening to this interview, not only in business, but probably also involved in racing. So, Richard, I wanted to ask you some final quick questions as we're coming up to the end of our interview. So, first one is, if you could have been present at or participated in a particular historic record attempt, which one would it be?
Oh, well, of course, I've been lucky enough to be on the Thrust SSC team, and that is probably the biggest and greatest one ever to break the sound there. I mean, that was just a huge thing. But if you put that one on the side, then it would be, I'd love to be part of John Cobb's team in 1947 when he achieved the first ever 400-mile-an-hour run, working with a brilliant man, Reed Railton. That would have been a great, great experience.
Yeah, those years seem to have been golden years for record breaking. The second question is, do you have a personal hero and perhaps one of the great British land speed record breakers?
Yeah, well, Cobb was undoubtedly the greatest. Very quiet man, didn't really like publicity, but got an enormous respect globally for what he achieved. He worked with and financed Reed Relton, who's a brilliant designer. And they came up with the Relton Mobile Special, which was an incredible car. And this just set that. It took, I think it was about 16 years before the jet cars could exceed 400 miles. Extraordinary experience. Great
Fantastic. And finally, looking back, if you were to come across a young Richard Noble today, maybe Richard Noble who had just sold the scrap of Thrust 1 and was wondering what to do, what advice would you give him?
Keep going and get on with it.
That's short and to the point. And on that note, I think that's a great way to finish what's been a really fascinating interview. Thank you very much for joining us today, Richard.
Absolutely my pleasure. Great. And of course, we haven't finished. There's more to come. And the book is at long last selling well, so that's great.
Fantastic. And I've purchased my copy and read it, I think, within the space of 2 days. So
good man.
That's any indication. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye.